All right. So thank you all for being here. This is our fifth expert session that we've had over the course of this program with our strategy lab participants, and specifically we're talking about assessment today. Just want to flag that this is something that has come up with most of our districts where we're seeing everyone is trying to figure out what do you do when you can't bring kids into the building to have them share what they know. And so this is certainly a common question around the country and around the world right now. And we're really excited to have ANet to be able to share their expertise and guidance around what to do. Next slide, or next two slides here. For those who are new to the strategy lab, this is 7 districts represented in this cohort of the work we're doing, run by the Learning Accelerator and Bellwether Education Partners. And a variety of districts around the country, all working towards more equitable and resilient learning models. And with where we are, as we can tell, almost everybody is back in school. We've got Phoenix up in Massachusetts starting very soon. And John from Cedar Rapids, I see, is here as well. They're starting up very soon as well. They were supposed to start much earlier, but in case you missed the news, they got hit with essentially a hurricane in Iowa that knocked out 30 of their campuses. So they're on their way to recovery, doing a lot of work around that, but they'll be starting up soon. So lots of love for them. And today we've got ANet here. You can jump to the next slide. Thank you. And Achievement Network, if you don't know them, they do a ton of work. They're, I think, working with almost 1,000 schools this year, serving 300,000 students across majority of the states here in our country. And they're really the experts around how do you assess for learning and how do you understand the data that comes alongside of that. And they'll be able to share much more about what they do. And specifically, we have 2 wonderful ANet leaders here with us, as you can tell. So we've got Molly and Lindsey here. And you can see their bios here, but Molly has 19 years of experience. I noticed Molly updated the slide to make sure it was 19, previously said 16. That's apparently not accurate. Almost up to 20 now. I used to be a coach in DC, which is something that Molly and Lindsey and I all have in common with DC public schools, oddly enough, and taught for a long time before that. And Lindsey doing a lot of work in the Midwest, and she spent 3 years as the director of school support in Minnesota. So also, again, KIPP DC, DC public schools represented, which I'm sure John Rice is fist pumping as well as a former DCPS employee. But anyways, we're really excited to have them. They're spending their time with us today. I would love to pass it off to Molly and Lindsey, to you all, if you want to share anything else about yourselves and let you jump in with your brilliance and talk to our team.
Awesome. All right. I got really excited by all these connections happening in the chat. This is so cool. Molly, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I actually have ping-ponged between Atlanta and the DC metro area for the majority of my adult life. So I've pinged back to Maryland, and now I'm a resident of Anne Arundel County. So close-ish to my DC roots. But in case you're wondering where I'm coming to you live from, it is my home office in the lovely state of Maryland. And now I'm going to turn it over to my fabulous Minnesota-based colleague, Lindsey, to kick us off.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. I know this is so exciting. It feels like a little homecoming with everyone, all these connections on the call. I love this. So I'm coming to you from Minneapolis, like Molly said. Long time in DC before that, back in Minneapolis, which is where I grew up, doing a lot of the same work because as you probably all feel, being in this cohort from different places around the country, like the urgency in the work is real everywhere, everywhere that we're working. And so just a couple quick logistics before we jump in. We definitely want to use the Zoom chat actively. Like, please feel free to jump in with questions there. We'll try to be pretty responsive as we go, as well as leave a little bit of time at the end to respond to questions. We are going to plan, or we are already recording this session so that we can share back with other participants. We'll make sure to share this with you with the slides and any other resources that we go through as well. And it's Friday, so hopefully will be high energy for you and invite you to just be as present and active alongside us as you can. All right. So just diving a little deeper into who we are at ANet. So our mission is at the top of this slide. Our goal is really to be in partnership with schools and school districts to strengthen their practices around using standards and data in service of strong results for students, particularly with a focus on underserved communities. And the next two pieces on this slide really represent sort of our internal organizational journey over many years to get to a place of being really clear about what our vision of equity is as it relates to schools and instruction for students, as well as a commitment to anti-racism. And so you can see the language on the screen, and I think the things that I just want to call out here are that piece around our equity vision that notes that we're talking about engaging students with meaningful supports so that they can reach or exceed a common standard. That's going to come through in everything that we share about approach to assessment throughout our time today. And then in terms of our commitment to anti-racism, this is really something that I think all of us are grappling with, and certainly something that has been like a long process for the ANet team to get to putting on paper, and something we're really trying to live out in both our own actual like assessment products, as well as the way that we sit alongside schools and help them think about what's in the best interest of their students through an anti-racist lens. And so again, we're just really here to be partnered alongside you all who are doing the real work with students in buildings. So here is where we're going today. We want to share with you what we've been learning from districts across the country since we released some assessment guidance in May. And within that guidance, we rolled out 3 guiding principles for a strong assessment system, both that's responsive to what's happening right now in COVID times, as well as longer term best practices, and how we can connect those to districts' needs. We're going to talk about some learnings from some places where these principles are shaping district planning and things that are working. And then hopefully also get some time to brainstorm, but certainly at least share with you some actionable tools and resources and some next steps that we can take. All right, so we know this year that everything feels like a balancing act, including assessment. There's this tension between getting the information we need to make the best choices about instruction while preserving really precious instructional time. And it feels like a balancing act. And we want to just give folks a chance. You feel free to come off mute and share aloud, but certainly in the chat, like what resonates with you here within your own district, or what else is feeling like a tension that you're balancing right now. So we'll give folks a moment, either type in the chat or feel free to come off mute and just share aloud.
Hi, Lindsay. I'll share.
Great.
This feels really relevant right now. We're definitely talking about this in our district, and we're in Austin, Texas, and being very cognizant about trauma, and often with assessment sort of being, used in a traumatic way. And so thinking about in this, after experiencing some of the traumas associated with COVID, and then going back to school, whether that's virtual or some sort of version of face-to-face, that assessments are traditionally, at least the way some of the assessments have been done, are further away on the spectrum from relationship building and connecting as people. And so I think that's part of the tension there of how do we make authentic assessment feel good, and that the result of that assessment feel good and contributive to your next steps. but definitely having these conversations in our district as well about how can we most accurately identify where our students are in order to design the best experience for them. So yeah, I love this visual. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's I saw some heads nodding. I think that's just so real. The reality of how assessments are executed, and traditionally the environment that they're happening in sometimes is felt perhaps so much more on the evaluative side that it can be a hard left turn to make sometimes, to think about how they become more of a supportive, or I heard you talk about relationship building opportunity too. I wanted to call out too, Bob, I saw your comment about in the chat about like, how do you balance assessing core concepts that were missed last year, but also having an asset-based mindset and not be, I like this term, gap hunters that take us away from grade level instruction. And that is something we're working on with all of our partners right now, is providing the tools and guidance to address learning loss in the context of grade level work. And I think we have good tools and resources to help people, but I want to just name the reality of actually doing it with students with the constraints we have. Like I think that's really where the rubber meets the road, and where we're still starting to see like what's really going to work once people get a few weeks with students under their belt. All right, I'm going to keep us moving. Molly, you can move us forward. All right, so we had this really cool opportunity this summer. Some folks on our team had a chance to work with some districts and states, the ones that are highlighted on the map you can see. And we got to do, we got to release our assessment guidance and then work with across these 6 states and 55 districts to help them with their instructional recovery planning. And so before we jump into those 3 overarching principles from our guidance, we just wanted to name some of the trends that are surfacing after doing that work with so many districts. So I'm just going to voice these over, and then Molly's going to bring us a little bit deeper into the first 2. So first thing we're hearing is that folks are just needing a lot of help to figure out how to progress monitor in 2021. And that's due to, 1, the potential remote environment, and just like, how do we do that when we're not face to face? But 2, I think also, do we have the right tools to get the right data really quickly and respond quickly? We're also hearing leaders talk about how, and I think this gets back to that comment about trauma, how do we integrate social emotional learning considerations and academics more seamlessly? That is a big need we're hearing from folks as well. And then we're seeing just a lot of variation state to state about assessment practices. So whether some are foregoing their state summatives, or whether there's a trend to sort of fall back on using large-scale diagnostics or benchmarking tools that are outside of their curriculum materials, which kind of ties into that difficulty of progress monitoring if we're using tools that might be far from instruction or require a longer cycle of data collection to be able to then take action on what we're learning from that data. And then finally, just knowing that folks are seeing a big need to rethink their communication structures. 1, I think just like the volume of change that people are experiencing right now and the flexibility that's needed requires more flexible communication, but also thinking about how we communicate student progress differently in the conditions we're in right now too. Molly, I'll kick over to you if you want to sort of add a layer to any of these 4 and then dive into our assessment principles.
Thanks, Lindsay. No, I think that's great. I would also say that hopefully too right now you're feeling a connection to some of the content that you received in your last session with Rebecca Kokler when she provided the overview of the CCSSO academics guidance. I'd say some of this also relates to the CCSSO system conditions guidance and then the well-being and mental health guidance as well. But there's sort of deep connections as well between these recovery plan trends, the best practices that are laid out in the CCSSO guidance, and we're going to do our best to sort of situate the principles we present related to assessments in the broader context of these priorities that are bubbling up now, because as Lindsey said, we released this guidance in May. A lot has changed since May, and we want you to be able to think about how do you apply these principles sort of in real time in your current context with your current needs. So, you know, wait no further, here they are, our 3 principles, and there's quite a bit of alignment as well when you think about these principles, what CCSSO says about strong assessment practices, what the Center for Assessment says about strong assessment practices. So just know you're not learning sort of a single framework that is disconnected from the broader field. There's quite a bit of alignment and sort of coalescing around these principles really being the things where districts will benefit from focusing their attention during this school year. So the first one is establishing a tiered approach to collecting data. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but for those of you who have strong MTSS and RTI systems, this will likely feel familiar to you. Prioritizing data close to instruction, and then using data to increase student and family engagement. There's a real way that we can use data, holistic data, academic data, to really be a bridge between families and school communities this year. And when we think about sort of those trends that Lindsey just voiced over, when we talk about principle 1, it'll be helpful for you to think about how this approach may support you and your leadership team in really integrating social emotional data and academic data so that you're not sort of overwhelmed by seas of Excel spreadsheets and different data platforms. When we think about prioritizing data close to instruction, there's a power, and I'll show you an artifact from a district that shows how they really used their focus on keeping data close to instruction to make sense of those larger scale benchmark assessments that were required and that they had to preserve as part of their assessment system. And then the last principle, I think, really connects to that trend we're hearing around this greater importance of re-envisioning, reimagining new ways to communicate with stakeholders. So there's a real promise that use of data, strategic use of data, can help again with our approach to communication and stakeholder engagement. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more, and I apologize for the sort of wonky animations. Animations are not my forte. So let's dig a little bit more into this idea of establishing a tiered approach to collecting data. So in short, what this is all about is really thinking about what is the data you need for all, some, and a few students, okay? Likely you have many different data sources that you are considering. You may have SEL or student well-being surveys. You may have attendance data, classroom engagement data, and then you might also have data from interim assessments or classroom assessments, student grades. And so, sorry about that. Okay. So essentially, when you use this principle, it helps you really prioritize that very scarce time that you have to ensure that whenever you're looking at data, there's a clear through line to a particular action that you, your school leaders, or your teachers can take to support student learning. So for instance, you may want to administer a short diagnostic or screener to all of your students. That might be something you want to look at the results of with your district data team that school leadership teams may want to look at together as well, to consider how to allocate your resources, how to perhaps play around with different staffing models in order to add more support for students who are furthest from grade level standards. You may want to look not just at the diagnostic data, but data from some additional screeners, other sources of information for some target students to make sure, okay, the students who may be furthest from the grade level standards, what are the root causes of some of the challenges that we're having, and how can we actually address those through our intervention structures, through additional supports, through, again, sort of staffing and resource allocation decisions. And we do have quite a few different examples of how this can look, different artifacts. There's sort of a more built out table in our paper, which I'm going to share a link to at the end of the session. And then when we come to sort of the few students, really that's our priority students, our students who are perhaps historically most marginalized, furthest from their grade level standards. We may want to take a more holistic view, and we may actually want to prioritize looking at the data from those students more frequently. Maybe we're looking at that in our teacher PLCs, our grade level meetings, but really using that data to most frequently adjust, intervene, and support students so that we're providing the critical supports for students, especially our priority students, and really helping bridge the gap between perhaps, the learning loss that they experienced over the course of the spring, and then the grade level expectations for the current grade in which they find themselves. So I do just want to sort of word of caution here. Sometimes people interpret this particular tiered approach to data as testing our most marginalized students most frequently. And that is not what this principle is about. It's about committing to looking at data, looking at multiple sources of data with the greatest frequency, to commit to action with the greatest frequency for our few priority students. It's also important to note that, a guiding principle of ANet and how we coach districts around the use of our assessments is we say data should never be a gatekeeper to grade level content, right? This is all about, again, resource allocation supports, identifying the needs of your students so that you can help enable them to access grade level content, as opposed to, putting them into a perpetual cycle of remediation. And then just sort of in a nutshell, sort of 30,000 foot view, what might this look like? This might look like a diagnostic that's short and focused. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Some quarterly progress checks, monthly data reviews, again, with a focus on some students, and then your most frequent data reviews that are more holistic, again, in nature, perhaps looking at social emotional needs in addition to academic needs. Those are those purple dots, and those are the things that are happening with the greatest frequency. Okay, so the next principle is a little bit more straightforward, and it's really about prioritizing data that's close to instruction. And in short, we basically recommend the rule of thumb, like, can a teacher use the data from this assessment next week, right? So instructional time is scarce. We don't want to put students and teachers in a position where they're taking valuable time to administer assessments that are not providing data that teachers can use to support their students. And so again, we sort of propose this rule of thumb. Can a teacher use this next week? If not, consider whether or not the assessment is worth giving. Examples of assessments that really are close to instruction are our curriculum embedded assessments, our in-lesson checks for understanding, and then also ANet has shorter cycle interims that are designed to be aligned to various high quality curricula that are on the market. But again, we want to keep curriculum and instruction and assessment tightly aligned so that when we're trying to figure out how to support students' needs, assessment data doesn't feel like a separate added layer that teachers then need to try to figure out, like, how does this help me identify students' needs tomorrow in the next unit, right? It just makes everything sort of more fluid, and those regular adjustments based on student data much easier on everyone. And a good example of this actually is the Louisiana remediation tools. So these are publicly available for anyone using Eureka, but essentially it's a focused diagnostic. It comes alongside with a sort of roadmap for the teacher for what to do and what adjustments to make within the next upcoming lessons, within the next topic, within the units. So that, again, that's that just-in-time intervention that everyone's talking about, and keeping our assessments really close to our instruction enables us to do that more easily. Okay, so I do want to play this short video here. Okay, let's see if I can.
Hi, welcome back everyone and learning to high standards. The results we of our 5-year councils
I should have had
strike a balance between the need for.
Okay, so real quick, this is an artifact from Madison Metropolitan School District that really is applying this principle of keeping assessments close to instruction to help their leaders and teachers make sense of their entire assessment system. So I want you to just pay close attention here to how this artifact demonstrates how this leadership team is situating those larger scale required assessments within a broader assessment strategy that really primarily relies on those close to instruction formative assessments as sort of its highest leverage data source. So I'm going to turn it over to Caroline from Madison to voice over a little bit of their strategy here.
Our specific assessment strategy for the 2021 school year is illustrated on this slide. This is definitely a general overview of our strategy and only represents academic data. What you will see here is our strategy of using critical screeners and instructional interim assessments. The yellow dots represent our critical screening assessments that help us identify students' unfinished learning. These are our adaptive assessments. The green are the assessments that are grade level assessments, ensuring that multiple times throughout the year, our students are experiencing grade level tasks and our teachers, parents, and families and students are able to respond to that data. The green and gold are assessments that are required and supported by the district. Taken together, this assessment strategy helps us to proactively know where students are in terms of growth and mastery in skills and standards before we get to the end of the year. The last part of our assessment strategy is represented by the purple dots as our short cycle formative assessments. As teachers, you know this is where the money is. These are the daily and weekly practices that you all use to drive your teaching and learning. These formative assessment practices are also used as the foundation for feedback to students and families. And these practices are best monitored at the school level. So what does that
Okay, well, hopefully the audio was okay there. I do want to just also, and I believe Nate has shared these slides with y'all, but one other resource that Madison found helpful in getting to this place is this assessment checklist here. And again, I alluded to sort of there being a lot of alignments around sort of these, the guiding principles that are most helpful for districts to use in formulating their assessment strategy for this year in a way that addresses learning loss and in a way that takes into account sort of the reality of scarce instructional time. And so this checklist is a tool that sort of puts all of the sort of primary sets of guidance out there, CCSSO, ours, and others, and lays it out in an easy to follow checklist for you to use and to hold your assessment framework or assessment system up against. So Lindsey, thinking that now might be a good pause point to see if anybody had any questions before we jump into the last principle around using data to improve communication with parents and families. So if you have a question, you can kind of come off mute, pose it to the group, or feel free to leverage the chat function as well. Lindsey, were you monitoring the chat too? Did you see any pop up as we were going?
No questions in the chat. I also just wanted to give folks a moment to open those links in case anyone did want to see, like, take a peek at that checklist. So maybe we can give folks a moment to open those up, and then yes, pause us for any questions now before we continue. All right, I don't want to stop everybody. If you are mid typing a question, feel free to continue and we can come back. But we'll keep going and jump into that third principle now too. All right, so here's where we're talking about how data can be used to increase student and family engagement. And getting back to sort of that anchoring comment earlier about trauma and how assessment has felt as an experience for students and families, and how it can be a focus on feedback and strong communication and clarity about a student's progress versus a focus on formal assessment and evaluation as the primary driver or reason behind assessing students. And so we want to talk about how assessments can be used instructionally to determine not just areas of need, but also areas of student strength, and how assessment can be a tool to make sure that students are staying or getting to the path of accessing grade level content. And we know it's going to be essential, not just for teachers, but also for parents to really understand how all of this learning disruption has impacted their child as they come into the 2021 school year and figure out what does it mean, not just right now, but in the longer term educational career of any student. And so we want to stay away from thinking about assignments as a tool to assign a grade or a level or have these rigid groupings. That's that equity connection that Molly was making before. But really thinking about, again, how are these tools to keep students and families engaged? So on the left-hand side, you see this quote from Jill Cowart from the Louisiana Department of Education. And we just want to call out here that this is a great time to really rethink and start to break some of those habits of only using data within our buildings. And so thinking about how we can get feedback into the hands of folks that have a greater stake than ever in driving learning forward right now. So thinking about how parents can be engaged by giving them clear and succinct information about their child's progress and ideas for how to support at home. And how we can engage students by prioritizing feedback on their assessments so that they stay connected to their teachers, regardless of the learning format that's happening right now. And so on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see some quick elements of strong feedback. And this probably feels familiar to folks when we think about perhaps feedback to teachers. But here we're really thinking also about feedback that parents and students are experiencing related to any assessments that they're experiencing in school. So we want you to just sort of reflect on the elements in this table and think about, like, where do you have strong feedback practices in place? When you think about that first element of feedback being timely, this connects to that idea of assessments that get you information close to instruction. So are you able to give feedback, share feedback with families and parents close to when that assessment happened and in a way that's relevant to what the student is going to experience quickly within the next week or so? Do you have structures in place or organizational norms about even the language that feedback is given in? Non-judgmental, non-evaluative language, specific and targeted around an area of recent learning that's clear and actionable. Do you have consistent rhythms in place where this isn't going to come out of the blue, but it builds on past feedback that a student and family has experienced, and it acknowledges the growth that a student has shown from one point to another, or the path that they're on towards those grade level expectations? And then do you have expectations in place about how to really make this feedback engaging? So not just sharing a red, yellow, or green designation, a reading level letter, but really thinking about how we're communicating in a way that builds a shared understanding between student, family, teacher, school, district, about what high quality work looks like, and getting more investment in why high quality work matters. So I want to talk for a minute too then about, like, what are some specific tools that you could use to do this, especially given the context that we're in right now. So I'll let you check out this list on the screen. And then this might be a great moment too, like if anyone is seeing something here that you've never heard of, feel free to put that in the chat if you want to learn more about it. Or if you've used any of these tools and you just want to stamp for the group, like, hey, this has been really effective for us, this might be a great moment to be able to just sort of like share experiences across the group. But these are great interactive tools that we're seeing different districts and schools have success with in terms of that communication structure and a means to provide that engaging feedback to families. And while you guys are looking at that, Molly, I will call out, there's a question in the chat about, can we share more about the thoughts behind the timing of beginning of year screeners and diagnostics?
Do you want me to respond to that whole group, or should I respond to it in the chat? Lindsay, what are you thinking?
I think go ahead and jump in.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I have heard a rule of thumb, and I am not actually sure who sort of first put this out there. I think it might have been Student Achievement Partners, but really ensuring that there is time to get students reacclimated to school, you know, and regardless of what format it's in, to start to build connections with caring adults, you know, again, whether it be via Zoom, and that, you know, the recommendation being to wait between 5 and 6 weeks, I think is the general rule of thumb I'm hearing, before administering a diagnostic. So the idea of having some sort of diagnostic measure that provides information about what foundational skills students may need additional support in, so they can access grade level content, that in of itself isn't as controversial as just sort of the idea of timing. And again, sort of the rule of thumb that I'm hearing is around 5 to 6 weeks into the school year before thinking about administering something like that. And it might be 4 to 6 weeks. But again, the idea being that we want to make sure that kids have an opportunity to begin to make those connections with caring adults in their school community, again, to build that trust. And and to build those conditions for learning.
I appreciate that, Molly. Thank you. I was just trying to balance what I think we're definitely on the same page with starting with the family engagement and the social emotional learning and kind of getting back into the swing of school, especially for us. It'll have been 6 months since we were in school. I think my main question was, can I do it on the third week, which for us would be like the middle of October at this point, or do I need to wait a little bit longer? Some of the way we framed our assessments have been, these are diagnostic that help you know where your kids are as you're starting instruction, and waiting 5 or 6 weeks is longer than I would have expected.
Mm-hmm. And let me, what I'll do is I'll find that resource and share it, because again, that's just from my memory, and it could be 4 to 6 weeks. You know, I'm not quite sure. And then I'll have Nate send that out to you. I would also say, like, another workaround would be if you wanted to think about shorter diagnostics that were close to instruction, i.e. that were somehow tied to your curriculum. So there are a large number of curriculum providers who have made additional diagnostic features available as part of their products. So I think there is a little wiggle room when you think about just a unit level diagnostic that might be embedded within your curriculum that could give teachers some information, a quick snapshot as they go into the first unit of study. That sort of 5 to 6 week rule was more for a larger scale diagnostic. But again, if my memory could be not totally serving me here, and you know, I might be misrepresenting it by a week or two. So I'll make sure that I get that and share that with Nate as a follow-up.
Oh, no worries. And this just helps me even conceptualize it, hearing different ways and approaches. So super appreciate you walking me through that thinking.
Hey guys, this is Emily from IPS. I just wanted to weigh in real quick. I think one of the places that's put out that best practice guidance has been the Council of Great City Schools, because what you're saying is consistent with the feedback or what they shared with us on those calls. So I do think the range of dates you're giving or weeks is aligned with what a bunch of different folks have said.
And I think one thing I'll name there, to jump off of what Molly was saying too, that I can imagine might be a tension folks are feeling, is like, you know, alongside this assessment guidance, one of the main things we've been supporting schools and teachers to do over the summer is to deepen their understanding of prerequisite standards that are going to be really critical for students to have mastered so that they can access the grade level content for this coming year. And I will say, just having done that work alongside teaching teams all summer, it's been a really big lift and a really big shift in how many teachers plan to devote what has been quite a bit of time this summer to going like 1, 2, maybe 3 layers deeper in their understanding of their grade level content to really truly understand what is likely a root cause behind a student's struggle with grade level learning. And so I think one thing that sort of not giving that diagnostic day one also enables you to do is kind of lengthen the amount of time that teachers also have to be continuing to really deepen their understanding of those prerequisite skills and standards, so that once you have that diagnostic data, they actually are more equipped to take quick action on it than if they're doing that learning after the fact or like as a part of interpreting that diagnostic data. Molly, I don't know if you'd add anything to that or.
Awesome. Lindsay, you want me to move us on to the next chunk here?
Sounds good.
Okie dokie. Okay, so just to sort of close us out here, we did want to share with you sort of this charge. I think that this is a really nice quote here. It speaks to the importance during recovery of building conditions, a coherent vision and relationships, all being part of sort of this reinvention opportunity that we have to design systems that may address some of the underlying issues of racism, marginalization, and drive towards a vision of more equitable instruction for all. And I know this is sort of a big, lofty sort of goal here. And I want to name that we just talked about a single aspect of this, right? We are talking primarily about assessment here. Granted, with the principles that we outlined, there is an opportunity to create some more bridges and coherence, especially between principle 2 and 3, when you think about sort of that bridge between assessment and instructional materials or instruction, which often may not be there. And then also thinking about sort of the more holistic needs of the child, student well-being alongside academics. I think principle 1 provides a roadmap for doing that. But you know, this is sort of really the charge here. And again, we have only spoken about some resources that relate specifically to assessments, but we also want to make sure that we're giving everybody an opportunity to zoom out and consider sort of those trends we put on the front end of the presentation in terms of sort of the common challenges and struggles that district leaders like yourselves are having, and sort of the bigger picture task that lays ahead. And so in service of that, we did want to provide you with some additional resources, again, to start to think about how do you situate assessment in sort of the broader context of instructional recovery. So I'll just give you a quick voiceover of what's here. And then we thought that folks could spend 5 minutes exploring, and then we would ask for you to jot down in the chat, and it could be just one next step that you're walking away with, or 2 to 3 next steps, depending on how you're feeling on this Friday afternoon. But we do have a head and heart resource that talks about SEL and academics. We've collaborated with our partner Transform Ed on that, and it really draws upon their SEL expertise and our expertise around academics. We have the checklist that I referenced earlier, in addition to the 3 principles paper that gives you a deeper dive into what Lindsey and I talked about. That is highlighted in the CCSSO academics guidance that you dug into last time with Rebecca. We have some communication resources. And then as you're thinking about system conditions, TNTP has a great resource that might be a good companion for ANet's restart and recovery template. And then Lindsey alluded to earlier the work that she's been doing this summer, really digging into prerequisites and understanding the standards alongside leaders so that they can start to think about tactically, how do we offer just-in-time interventions for students. And so there's a resource here as well that also was featured in the CCSSO academic guidance. But I do just want to invite you guys to click around. We're running a little bit low on time, but would really value it if you could pop in the chat a concrete next step that you're thinking of taking away from our time together today. And I'm sure that your colleagues on the Zoom would also appreciate seeing you know, what everybody across this group is coming up with.
And I just re-chatted the link to the slides again, in case anyone missed that the first time.
Okay, would anybody prefer to share their next step with the group and come off mute? I saw a couple in the chat. I did see some, love for the checklist in the chat, which is good. Hopefully, sometimes the best tools are the simplest, right? So it was in that spirit that was designed. Okay, I know we also have some closeout thoughts from Nate here, but I did want to just share that our complete restart and recovery template that aligns to the CCSSO guidance is going to be released next week. You can follow us on Twitter or Facebook. And then, that'll just sort of hit your social media feed when it does become live. That's another tool that we're thinking is going to be really helpful for progress monitoring. And then also helping districts really think about the coherence piece of aligning their assessment, their materials, and their communication and engagement strategies. And then we also would really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind taking 2 minutes of your time to quickly take the survey. We really value feedback and want to know what was useful to you and what was less so. This is the first time we've talked about this guidance since school has started. So we tried to take a little bit of a different, bring a little bit of a different perspective. And I'm really curious if that was helpful and felt timely to y'all. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Nate to close us out.
Great, thank you so much.